see. Uh-oh. I'm gonna have to free up some disk space and do it fast. Meetings.
Do you have the recordings uploaded somewhere?
Yes, I have not deleted them. That's what I need to do. They're on YouTube, so they'll last until YouTube finds the Bible offensive and cancels all Bible recordings. Okay, this cannot be undone. Here it goes. I don't know. I think of all the millions of people who. No. Delete. Delete. Oh, and now if I just empty my recycle bin.
Okay.
Family and dish or washer, dog and.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So, turns out it was actually God's divine. I couldn't eat nothing. I don't want to give me good food.
Your dog had acid reflux?
Oh, really bad, so they was kicking 3 days in a row.
Ew,
Oh,
that's horrible.
Daughters, orders.
Thank you again. I got one extra just in case we had a random newcomer.
I think partly it's partly eating.
Best of luck.
Everything is
Yeah.
such a monster.
And open the Bible study. Bible study. Job.
Happy birthday.
Got them there, but not on, yeah.
It's gonna be fine for now.
But is it still the same one or is it?
Oh, sorry. Jake and Janelle. I didn't have the camera on. Sorry about that. We are here.
Hi,
How you doing?
how are you?
Good. Good. We got Bartons and Derek and Jenna here as usual. Derek, Jenna, Bartons. No, I'm just showing the ladies who's here. Huh.
All right, let's see here.
Um,
33 maybe.
What are you counting?
I'm wondering if we're on chapter 34. No, we're more than that.
35.
35, all right.
I'm pulling up the Bible study now, but it didn't seem to update to this computer, so I have to go online and do it that way. So
Oh, okay.
it'll be just a moment. Bible studies. Are you scraping something against something, or like a
Yeah.
a fork maybe, or?
Yes, Jake is finishing his supper.
Ah, okay. Don't worry, it won't last long. It sounds here like, I don't know, it sounds much louder than that. So it's just how it goes.
Yeah, he just had a late supper tonight.
Late tea supper, like as every night.
That's right, we have that every night.
Oh yes, I'm good. My hard drive space is low. Yeah, I got to fix that tonight. That's why it didn't upload the file. No problem. Figure this out. Well, anybody got anything interesting to share before we jump into things? You sold a book that you wrote,
Yes.
not the used book or something. Awesome.
That was my fourth one, and this is the first one that's paperback.
Wow,
Woo!
sweet. You should send me a link and I can put it in the weekly email.
It's an Advent book. I don't know if people are doing buying it, nobody bought it during Advent, because I didn't publicize it or anything.
Yeah.
Barely published.
Well,
by
hey.
Advent.
It's all right.
It's sold more than this year.
They're just early
Whatever.
preparers. Maybe they're educators or something.
Probably everybody from the church.
That's okay. But I think I've only advertised it once, so in the weekly email, so I can advertise it again. You have your own site, like your own site on Amazon or something?
My own listing.
Yeah, sure. Well, I could link that. Cool.
Right.
And that's the first paperback you've sold.
Yeah.
You've sold Kindle.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Nice.
don't even have a paperback. I was intending to order stuff for myself. but-
Yeah, that's nice today with, is it just self-published then? I mean, you can print at will.
Yes.
Don't have to spend a bunch of money printing a bunch. They can just, when someone orders it, they print it up and.
It takes them 1 or 2 days, lead time, turnaround time,
Hmm.
whatever. Before they ship it.
Cool. All right, well, that's good news. Anybody else? Anything? How's it going, Jelaine?
Okay, thanks.
Glad you could make it. How was your drive in?
Beautiful. I come the back road from out there and just probably drive into it.
Oh, yeah, I kind of know. You might go by the Laties. You go on, what do you live on, Laties?
Dartford.
Dartford, yeah, that's what they live on.
Are they in there?
Yeah, you go right by their house. Yep.
Yeah, it's really pretty. I'll do it now when I go home. I won't go.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, Kelly and I have just driven out there and parked and walked. It's nice. Derek, would you mind grabbing me a Bible? I have once again forgotten, and I hate to get up for the people online. Okay, well, we will begin. So today is our last day of looking at Elihu, maybe one of the more challenging sections of the book of Job, but there's, it's a mixed bag, as we've seen, and we will see. There's some good stuff, and there's some ambiguous stuff, and there's probably some stuff we would say is not good, but he never gets criticized by the Lord, so that's interesting. We'll jump into it. First, we'll have a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, please bless our study, work through the power of your word to grow our faith, to help us rely on you more and on ourselves less, to empty the pride out of our hearts and fill us with love and humility and faith. We ask it in Jesus' name, amen. So then, on to the review question. Elihu is a bit mysterious, but since the Lord never addresses him at the end of the book, we assume that his answers are less offensive than those of the three friends. So far, just thinking back to last week, can you remember what mistakes of the three friends has Elihu avoided thus far in the book?
Telling Job that he must have done something wrong to deserve that God.
Yeah, he has never quite said that to Job. He has implied that Job has sinned, but only in his words that we assume are just the words he has heard himself, which were sinful, and God will correct them. All right, has he avoided any other mistakes that the three friends made? Or maybe done something positive that they didn't do?
Wasn't this?
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I'm surprised that he can pick up every little thing.
Oh, yeah. Got a great microphone.
Yeah. Well, he just isn't as strong. He comes on more subtly to refute and to discuss the issues.
Yeah, and I would use the word harsh. His language is not as harsh,
Right.
at least for the most part. You're right. And he keeps saying things like, come on, Job, I'm your friend. I want to help you. I'm not angry with you, but yeah.
Just a man to remote dust.
The remote dust.
Remote dust.
We are both dust. Yeah, exactly.
Quotes him very close.
Pretty accurately. Last time he quoted him. This time we'll start out with a quotation and see it's maybe not quite as accurate. Any criticisms that you remember we found for Elihu? He still does get caught up in this God rewarding the righteous and punishing the wicked, but he doesn't ever apply it directly to the Job. I think the problem would be maybe he's too vague. He makes some statements that sound very similar to what the friends had already said, but they're not as pointed. Which
And
is
he beats
perhaps
around the bush a lot. He repeats himself a lot.
yeah.
Listen to what I say and all of that over and over.
And we'll see that again. Yeah. So a lot of that. But all right, now we'll get into it. So 35, 36, and 37, and going at our faster pace, but I think that helps get the train of thought better. So first of all, chapter 35, 1 through 8. Would anybody like to pick it up? Derek, thank you.
All right, 35, verse 1. Then Elihu said, "Do you think this is just? You say, I will be cleared by God. Yet you ask him, what profit is it to me? What do I gain by not sinning? I would like to reply to you, and to your friends with you. Look up at the heavens and see. Gaze at the clouds so high above you. If you sin, how does that affect you? If your sins are many, what does that do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? And what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness affects only a man like yourself, and your righteousness only the sons of men."
Okay. This is similar to stuff we've heard before. I'd invite everybody to turn to chapter 9 and look at verses 29 to 31 though first. Or you can just listen to me read it if you'd like to compare the two. But this is Job speaking, and here's what he said. "Since I am already found guilty, why should I struggle in vain? Even if I wash myself with soap and my hands with cleansing powder, you would plunge me into a slime pit so that even my clothes would test me." All right, that's what he said speaking to God. So then now look again at Elihu's quote back in 35. Hope you kept your finger there. He said, "I am in the right, not God." You said, "What profit is it me and what do I gain by not sinning?" So has Elihu accurately captured Job's point here?
It seems like he's softened it up.
Okay.
Job used fine pit.
Yeah, so Job uses harsher language, more maybe striking, offensive language. Anything else different, or does he seem to have gotten the essence of the point?
It's not word for word.
Yeah, I mean, the gist of it is, what's it matter if I sin or not? And his point is, what do I gain by not sinning? So it's pretty close. I mean, it may not be exactly, but it's a fairly close argument. Now, when Job was talking, he wasn't really saying, therefore, I'm never going to try not to sin. I mean, Job has never said he's going to stop worrying about sin. And you could kind of imply that from what Elihu says. Yeah.
Job was saying, you've already convicted me, so what does it matter?
Yeah, he's
Not necessarily if I've already sinned, you've already convicted.
yeah. So Job is more concerned, like looking backwards,
Yeah.
and the way Elihu speaks, it sounds like he's almost looking forwards. So there is a little bit of a difference, but it is the main idea. So that seems like a kind of a fair quote, but not perfect. But then, is this correct? And also, Eliphaz had said things like this. I didn't include the reference. This idea that if you affect God, or if you sin, it only affects you. So in what ways is Elihu correct and also incorrect about our sin affecting only God?
I've sinned against man and I've sinned against God. That's just the way it is.
Okay.
They're not saying
Yeah. So like when David confesses, against you, you only have I sinned. They seem to, Elihu is not really talking that way, right? He's saying it doesn't really matter if you sin. Is there some truth to that? When he says, if you're righteous, what do you give him? your wickedness only affects humans like yourself.
Not really.
Yeah, I mean, our sin definitely offends God. I suppose it's true that we can't hurt God per se. I mean, we can't steal from him. We can't detract from his glory, but we can't offend him. So I think that this is wrong. I think, just from my understanding of the Bible. There's no answer key to Job, so maybe I'm missing something, but I think here he's kind of off track. Yeah.
It just seems like he's terribly skeptical and, the attitude of wickedness.
Elihu?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what he's quoting Job in the first two verses, but yeah, he seems to say it's not that big of a deal. And stressing God's transcendence, but not his immanence. Stressing his distance from humans, but not his concern for humans. And his concern for justice as well. So yeah, I wouldn't ever put it that way. I would never go tell somebody, your sin doesn't matter to God. It seems like a bad way to put it. Yeah. Even though there's a certain sense, I mean, you're not by sinning, you're not going to somehow, I would say, don't think you can get revenge at God by sinning. Maybe that would be bad. If you're not.
What you do isn't gonna hurt his reputation or whatever, but it's still.
Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting phrase. I think we disagree with it, but it's a little different than things we usually find. But then how about verses 9 through 16? This is more of a clearer argument, more cut and dry what he's getting at. Anybody ready to read verses 9 through 16?
I can do it.
Thank you, Jake.
Men cry out under a load of oppression. They plead for relief from the arm of the powerful. But no one says, "Where is God, my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches more to us than to the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds of the air?" He does not answer when men cry out because of the arrogance of the wicked. Indeed, God does not listen to their empty plea. The Almighty pays no attention to it. How much less then will he listen when you say that you do not see him, that your case is before him and you must wait for him? And further, that his anger never punishes and he does not take the least notice of wickedness. So Job opens his mouth with empty talk. Without knowledge, he multiplies words.
Yeah. So Elihu now, he's suggesting a new reason why God might ignore somebody who's suffering, who cries out to him. So what is the reason? What reason does Elihu suggest explaining why God sometimes ignores the cries of the suffering?
Because they're arrogant.
Yeah, you were pointing the same thing. Sometimes the people who are suffering are arrogant themselves, and they're not totally innocent victims. Is that true? Yeah, sure. Not really true in Job's case, at least not completely, but Job has become arrogant. Like, it wasn't true at the beginning, but it's true now that he has been filled with pride, if you remember some of the things he said. So he's offering at least a slightly more sophisticated explanation than we've seen earlier in the book. Kind of a long section, but that's the main point. But it is an advance in the argument. I guess we want to recognize that. So that's why Job says he's talking without knowledge. He's not thinking of all the possibilities for why he might be suffering. Kind of interesting. Well, anything else there that you noticed?
It doesn't sound like he's got a high opinion of God
Elihu?
at this point in time, in these words. Like saying, well, not everybody call the God in, say, so everybody.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. He does. That'd be interesting to look at, because he does stress certain attributes of God here coming up.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. He doesn't seem to emphasize the whole idea of Psalms, like all those who trust in him will be saved. No one who seeks refuge in him will be turned away. Cry out to the Lord. I cried out and he heard my plea. He does seem to be not as aware of that.
Or skeptical.
Yeah, true.
Sounds skeptical. to me.
Yeah. They're not skeptical of God existing, but that God will have anything to do with us, really.
Or that God will get involved in all of our little hours and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I mean, big things, introduction, otherwise, influence yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of that way. That being said, we'll see we may adjust that at the end of chapter 36. So we'll keep going, but he does come across that way in this section. Now just 4 verses, and I have a feeling you're all going to enjoy these. Let's have Simon read them, because they exemplify his youth and inexperience. You're the youngest one here, that's all. Or can you do it with your headaches and stuff? Okay.
Bear with me a little longer, and I will show you that there is more to be said in God's behalf. I get my knowledge from afar. I will ascribe justice to my Maker. Be sure that my words are not false. I'm perfect in knowledge.
Yes, one perfect in knowledge is with you. So
Yeah.
yeah, the kind of overconfidence. Although that being said, the older guys had overconfidence too.
Yeah.
But he's not hiding it. He's not being subtle. One perfect in knowledge is with you.
18.
Yeah, that does sound like a 20-year-old. 16 is probably the perfect age for that. Yeah. I wish Laura were listening. But then it is interesting, however, he says that he's speaking on God's behalf. And at the end of 37, God and Elihu almost do kind of a tag team, because Elihu sees the storm coming and starts anticipating the way the Lord will talk. So there seems to be, maybe it's not quite, it's maybe too much to say there's some truth to that he's speaking on God's behalf, but at the same time, he is kind of warming up for God. And so keep that in mind. It's interesting, this section 36 to 37, it's moving more and more towards the Lord's thunderstorm.
Say that more sounds like I wrote this.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. He's falling in line.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. He's proud of all the characters in the book, and I say that not as though they're only characters, but of all the people listed, he is the best option. Yeah, but strong statement. But here we're going to get another new thought that he adds in verses 5 through 12, and he'll give another reason why the righteous people might be suffering. So, anybody want to take that? Yep.
God is mighty, but does not despise men. He is mighty and firm to his purpose. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their life. He does not take his eyes off the righteous. He enthrones them with kings and exalts them forever. But if men are bound in chains, held fast by cords of affliction, he tells them what they have done, that they have sinned arrogantly. He makes them listen to correction and commands them to repent of their evil. If they obey and serve him, they will spend the rest of their days in prosperity and their years in contentment. But if they do not listen, they will perish by the sword and die without knowledge.
Yeah. So what is a new reason that he gives here to explain the righteous suffering?
Well, they have done something that they need to be disciplined.
Yeah, they need some correction there in verse 10. That's pretty much it. I mean, that's about that's the new point he makes. But the question is, as you look at the way he phrases things, are there any significant differences, question 6, between this and the accusations of his friends earlier? Because he basically says, if someone is held fast in chains, if they're in some bad situation, he'll tell them what they did. And if they listen and they obey and they serve him, then they'll be prosperous. And if they don't, then they won't. And maybe we don't have to check all these, but just go look at Job 8, 5 through 7 as one example that you might remember.
One thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
There is, during this, God has not told me what is.
Okay, that's true.
They're saying,
Yeah.
he will tell you, he will correct you.
That's a good point. That is a good point. So that is a little different. The friends didn't say that. The friends didn't say, look, if you've done wrong, God will tell you. They said, we know you've done wrong.
Right.
So already right there is a subtle difference. I think it is a subtle difference, but you can see why some people say Elihu is just repeating what the friends say, because it is close.
It's close, but there's difference.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So look at chapter 8, verses 5 to 7. I can read it. But if you will seek God earnestly and plead with the Almighty, even if you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. Your beginnings will seem humble, so prosperous will your future be. That's just one example of where they had promised similar things.
Make a lot of promises on God's behalf.
Yeah. And so is, so is Elihu, yeah. I do think, let's see, look at verse 5. God, back to chapter 36. God is mighty, but despises no one. He is mighty and firm in his purpose. That's a little bit kinder version of God he's putting forth, that God doesn't despise anybody, even wicked people. When he has them suffer, he hopes that they'll repent. That's a different idea, I think. So, but it is tricky. People really have, commentators go different ways. I'd say right now the trend is to say that Elihu is just repeating the friends, but I still agree with what Lance is saying. There are subtle enough differences that that's why he's here. The next couple verses, though, just to give you an idea, in Job, I think I have mentioned a few times, the Hebrew is difficult in some places. And my theory would be that's because it's one of the oldest books in the Bible. And so the meaning of many words has been lost. And sometimes the syntax or the grammar is unusual. And these particular verses are some of the worst, so to speak. And I took a paragraph out of this Word Biblical Commentary by a guy named Kleins. These verses from verse 13 to 21 have been among the most difficult and controverted in the book, and the proliferation of variant renderings and proposed emendations is bewildering. People trying to change this letter, change that letter, try to make it more sensible. Some, like the NAB, give up the task of translating verses 16 to 20 altogether. But there is no need to panic, for by keeping the already stated position of Elihu clearly in view and rejecting proposals that deviate from his present purpose or descend into banality or generalized advice, a reasonably coherent sense can be attained. So, and I agree with him. You can make sense of it, but it is a bit difficult. And just to show you what he's talking about, I had the NAB on my computer there, and look, verse 15, and instructs them through distress. Then 16 to 20, they just leave it out. They don't even try to translate it. And then they pick it up at 21. So I think that's kind of irresponsible, really, but that translation was done in the 1970s, so they probably thought they were being edgy or something.
Well, it's like in Mark chapter 16, where they
Yeah.
say, most people don't even put this in, we're just putting it
Yeah. Although there it has to do with the original manuscripts, and some of them are missing that. Here, it's not that they're missing, it's just that it's so hard to translate, they just don't even bother. They say, we can't possibly make sense of it. And as he says, even though maybe there's a few nuances that have been lost to time, we can get a general sense of these verses. But keep in mind, the translations do tend to smooth things like this out. So there are places in the Bible where it's harder to read than you'd realize. And learning Hebrew is different than learning Greek. When you learn Greek, the New Testament becomes more clear. And when you learn Hebrew, the Old Testament becomes a little more vague. So it's not what you're kind of hoping for. And often there's more than one way to interpret it. Never in a theological way, but just,
Is that anything to do with, is it Hebrew, that double vowels?
yeah, that's a big part of the problem.
And you don't know which vowels to put where.
Yeah, so you have, and the way their words work is if you use one vowel, it's a verb. And if you just change the vowels, it's now a noun. And if you change the vowels a different way, it's now a adjective with all the same consonants. It's neat, but it's it leaves a lot of ambiguity in some situations. So, all right, anyway, we'll keep going here, just keeping that in mind that this is a little bit tough.
What were the sections again that they kind of speak out?
16 through 20. So we'll do 13 to 15 first. This isn't as confusing. We'll do that quick and then we'll look at the next one. So 13 to 15. Anybody? Blaine, you got it with your crazy translation?
Well, it's a different one.
That's okay. We'll just
I'll
follow
try.
ours.
Okay. The godless in heart cherish anger. They do not cry for help and combine them. They die in youth and their life ends among the cold prostitutes. He delivers the afflicted by their affliction and opens their ears by adversity.
Okay, so what are godly and ungodly ways of responding to suffering?
That is hard for me to go.
Oh yeah, just 13 to 15.
And deplete.
I don't know if you pay attention.
Yeah,
This can make a change.
exactly. So
Otherwise, you just consider it in the first place. It's
Yeah.
worse.
So the guy, I mean, it's not a surprise, right? A godly person will listen to God, will hear God speaking to them. And the godliest person will just become resentful. And they won't cry for help. They'll just try to handle it themselves and won't turn to God. And yeah, I mean, the first 14, they die in their youth among the male prostitutes of the shrines. That's tells you what their society was like. It was, when people say, oh, society is going downhill. I mean, 4,000 years ago, it wasn't much better. That was probably a bad way to go, though. Probably had all sorts of diseases and things. So the point being, though, when you're afflicted, and he never really says to Job real specifically, although maybe he is in 16, but we see that that's a very tough section. For sure, I know that you've sinned. He's just saying, maybe you have. And I guess if you think of it as being a real conversation, I mean, Elihu doesn't know. He doesn't know Job's innocent. He doesn't know he's guilty. And if you look at it in that way, he's speaking to him as though, and there was a section we saw last week where he said, look, Job, not me. You tell me, do you need to repent? So he seems to be speaking as well as he can from his lack of knowledge. But yeah, the two possible ways of response. Well, why don't we now look at this 16 to 21, and this is the final address to Job telling him what to do, but just keep in mind, 16 to 20 is quite hard to translate. 21, though, is pretty clear. Anybody want to read this?
I will.
Thank you.
He is pulling you from the jaws of distress to a spacious place free from restriction, to the comfort of your table laden with choice food. But now you are laden with the judgment due the wicked. Judgment and justice have taken hold of you. Be careful that no one entices you by riches. Do not let a large bribe turn you aside. Would your wealth or even all your mighty efforts sustain you so you would not be in distress? Do not long for the night to drag people away from their homes. Beware of turned evil, which you seem to prefer to affliction.
Yeah. Oh, and I just saw the NIV note. See there on verse 20. You see that note? It says the meaning of the Hebrew for verses 18 to 20 is uncertain. So they feel like they figured out 16 and 17, but they're still just guessing. And so it comes across here, maybe some of his most direct, criticizing Job, but keep in mind it's very tentative, exactly what it's talking about. That's, the stuff about food on the table and longing for the night, what is the connection? It's not totally clear. But verse 21 continues the idea we saw. Oh, which part?
Belonging to the night.
Oh,
trying to, just blot it out.
You would want death or something.
Yeah.
And the food on the table, that's heaven.
Well, no, that's true. Sorry, but is if that's the best translation is the
Oh.
question. So, and we could look word for word in the Hebrew, but basically that's kind of their interpretation. But you're right, they're giving an interpretation that does make a lot of sense. But their interpretation is kind of implying, for example, if you look at 17, but now you are laden with the judgment due the wicked. Judgment and justice have taken hold of you. And it may not be so much that he's saying you are wicked, but just you're being treated like a wicked person. There's a lot of kind of ambiguities there.
This one here says,
Yeah.
beware lest wrath entice you into stopping.
Which one, which verse?
18,
18, beware lest wrath.
entice you into stopping,
Yeah,
and
and-
let not the greatness of the ransom turn you aside.
yeah. So you can see how different that is, so, but the main point is pretty clear anyway in verse 21. So whatever the specifics, beware of turning to evil, which you seem to prefer to affliction. So he's saying, don't be like those people in verse 13 who just are resentful, but instead turn to God when you're afflicted. And he's not per se saying how you got to your affliction. It's just you're clearly afflicted now. And there's two routes you can go. You can go towards God, or you can go away from him, go towards him. And all those other questions seem to have something to do with that, like longing for the night. I think that the thing about the night in 20 is he waiting for death, the night of death, or is it, well, or it could also be wicked people wait for night so they can go rob houses. That would seem a little much, for him to be saying Job's that wicked that he's going to go robbing people right now. But then when he says drag people away from their homes, that makes more sense really with sneaking around at night than waiting for death. So kind of a tough one, but it'd be better to just get the big picture, and I can recommend a good commentary if you want to really dig in. Or you could just take like 5 English translations and compare them, and you'll see how different they all are for those verses. But back to the argument. Now he's going to switch topics, and really the chapter could have taken a break here, but the next chapter is so long, and he's going to talk about God's power. So 22 to 26. Anybody want to read it? Thank you, Derek, again.
God is exalted in his power. Who is a teacher like him? Who has prescribed his ways to him? Or said to him, you have done wrong. Remember to extol his work, which men have praised in song. All mankind have seen it. Men gaze at it from afar. How great is God, beyond our understanding. The number of his years is past finding out.
Okay, so here he has a high view of God, so to speak. Which attributes of God does Elihu highlight as important for Job to keep in mind? Mm-hmm.
Knowledge.
And whole.
Yeah, knowledge, great, all wise, eternal, all powerful. So very mighty. Not really his kindness or his compassion, but just his wisdom, knowledge, and power. So we would tend to emphasize God's mercy and compassion and grace, but it's more, he's so great, you can't understand him, and so don't question him. That's why he's emphasizing these things.
So you're saying he's emphasizing the wisdom and the power.
Yeah, yeah. Wisdom, power, almighty, eternal, He's just so far beyond us that we can't question him or challenge him in any way. And it would be silly to. And there's no one that's his equal, you could also say, for 23. And why do you think he emphasizes those things? He just had said, look, you're being afflicted, whatever the reason, you can either go towards him or away from him.
Yeah, well, back here, it says, don't be enticed by riches and everything else.
Mhm.
You know, now he's going on and say, the knowledge of God is more than we can understand.
Yeah. I mean, there's basically turn to God because he's the only good option. He's better than any other option. Go to him. Keep in mind too, this message, you probably all read the book of Job before here. And this is the kind of thing that God himself will emphasize at the end. It's his own mightiness and his own power and all his inscrutable ways. And then now we really focus in on a thunderstorm in verses 27 to 33, a little bit longer section. And God himself will also talk about the rain and the water cycle. And so that's why I said earlier, he claims to be speaking for God. And it's interesting how the end of his speech kind of nicely dovetails with God's own speech. So anybody got 27 to 33? Lance.
Draws up the drops of water, which distill as rain to the streams. The clouds pour down their moisture, and abundant showers fall on mankind. Who can understand how he spreads out the clouds, how he thunders from his pavilion? See how he scatters his lightning about him, bathing the depths of the sea. This is war. This is the way he governs the nations and provides food in abundance. He fills his hands with lightning and commands it to strike its mark. Its thunder announces the coming storm. Even the cattle make known its approach.
Yeah. And so what are the similarities? But he mentions the water system, then the nations, governing the nations, providing food, it's food systems and storms. What are the similarities? Or maybe I should have said, what are the connections between those things?
Need water for life.
God's in control of all of that.
Yeah. And they all kind of work together to sustain life. Exactly. So, and it's interesting how he connects those things, because we tend to think of things that are sort of purely natural, the natural sciences, and then the human sciences, economics. I mean, we think of economics and meteorology as, totally different things, but he's looking at them all here together, because you're right, God controls them all. And he uses the same wisdom to oversee everything. And even as I wrote it, I realized this question was maybe too vague, or I'm fishing for a specific answer, but maybe you can see what I'm getting at. Question 8. How does setting God's governance of the nations alongside purely natural phenomena begin to address the question of God's justice?
He's in control.
Yeah. And he's in control of the nations, just like he's in control of the weather. How does that add a layer of complexity when we start talking about God's justice?
I think it's it's around its every day.
Okay.
I mean, say the situation that our country's in now with all this chaos. You get hit with a tornado or a hurricane.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The Midwest is drying up right now.
Yeah.
We're not getting any rain for, I don't know how long it's been,
Mhm.
years, that we haven't seen. I think people say God's in control. and say
Hurricanes
that
and tornadoes.
flippantly, But really, there's examples all around us.
Yeah. So there's examples of, was anyone going to say anything else? Derek?
Well,
Yeah.
The idea that I kind of come back to on this is like sometimes we look in the Bible and we see cases where God tells the Israelites to destroy this town.
Mhm.
And we say, oh man, it's terrible. But at the same time, we realize that God could have sent a hurricane.
Yeah.
Destroyed the or a volcano.
Mhm.
And they're all in this, he's working through.
Man and nature.
Yeah. So he's working through man, also through nature. Anything else? Were you
I'm
gonna?
really proud of, say, the Knollmeyers. They dry farm. They
Yeah.
absolutely rely on God for the rain for their crops.
Yeah.
And if it's not there, it's not there.
Yeah.
And if it's there at the wrong time, it's there at the wrong time
Mhm.
for them.
Yep.
But God is in control of every drop of that rain.
Yeah. And I think when you compare those things and you compare God's justice, we can't fully understand how he's doing, how tornadoes and rain fits, but yet we know he's in charge and it works and humans are taken care of. And sometimes it's justice. We don't totally see it, but it's really not ours to question, because it's more complicated.
And
And
it feels crummy for them when they have.
Yeah.
tough Harvest.
yeah,
And it's
exactly.
really delightful when they have a very good harvest. But
Yeah, but they can't then turn around and question God and think they know better how to make the weather system work. You know.
And they haven't devised a way to get the water from wherever to their
Mhm.
crops in some other way and then have to move the sprinkler systems and all, but they
Mhm.
haven't done that. They totally relied on God.
Yeah.
That's so in awe of that.
Yeah, it is very impressive. I wish the Nomeyers were here to hear our praises, but it is. Yeah, but this point of comparison is really what's going to drive most of the Lord's speech. So it's interesting that Elihu is the one who introduces it, just in that one phrase there, verse 31. So, but then 37 is going to continue this thing about the thunderstorm. And it's often assumed, I wrote in question 9, and I think it's true, that it's assumed that the Lord's storm cloud is now approaching, because when the Lord speaks in the next chapter, he's going to speak out of a storm. So it seems to be like, you can imagine they're all talking and he's pointing to this storm that's coming up from the east or wherever. And it's kind of neat. This part would be a good movie. Most of this book would be kind of a boring movie. It would just be dialogue, but this part would be neat. All right, so 37, 1 through 13, kind of a long section. Dave, would you want to read that?
Okay.
Thank you.
At this, my heart pounds and leaps from its place. Listen to the roar of his voice, to the rumbling that comes from his mouth. He unleashes his lightning beneath the whole heaven and sends it to the ends of the earth. After that comes the sound of his roar. He thunders with his majestic voice. When his voice resounds, he holds nothing back. God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. He does great things beyond our understanding. He says to the snow, fall on the earth, and to the rain shower, be a mighty downpour, so that all men he has made may know his work. He stops every man from his labor. The animals take cover. They remain in their dens. The tempest comes out from its chamber, the cold from the driving winds. The breath of God produces ice, and the broad waters become frozen. He loads the clouds with moisture. He scatters his lightning through them. At his direction, they swirl around over the face of the whole earth to do whatever he commands them. He brings the clouds to punish men or to water his earth and show his love.
Yeah. Neat. And then I only had one question. So to what aspects of God do his storms point? And I pointed you to verses 5 and 7, but also 13. So, okay, his power?
And his, well, his wisdom and his eternal.
Yeah.
His reign is punishment and blessing.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting there in verse 13. I really didn't strike me until Jake was reading it there, but can go both ways. Yeah, but his power, and then specifically in verse 5, he says he does great things beyond our understanding. So you're starting to get this idea that is just going to be amplified.
But he's just slightly bigger than we are.
Yeah. And 7, so he has made may know, so that everyone he has made may know his work. So he's revealed himself to us. We can't fully understand him, but we can see what he does and stand in awe of it and realize that he can bring blessing or punishment. Yeah, but you can just see him standing. And also, I should have mentioned, if this was in kind of the Edom area, that is where you get this really, hundreds of miles across flat desert. And so just imagine looking out across that. And if you've been out on the plains, yeah, when there's a thunderstorm coming, I mean, I don't know how many miles away you can see, but many. And it's really neat to watch. I've had that experience in Minnesota and Wisconsin some.
You can smell it too.
Yeah, you can. I forgot about that.
Smell the rain.
Yep. So this would
Long
be,
before it gets there.
yep.
Lance can too. I think that's nonsense, but whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Michelle can too. She smelled the rain the other day.
Yeah,
Whatever.
there is a certain smell.
It's just, I think if you grow up with it,
Yeah.
it becomes second nature.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing I do miss about
Yeah.
living out east. We don't seem to get as many big storms here. You get a few, but you know, compared to growing up in Tennessee, we had them every other week, all summer long. That was neat. Where?
In my joints.
Oh, yeah, yeah, in your bones.
My grandfather was like, "Oh, barometers,"
Yeah.
you know, always feel where it was gonna hit.
Yeah. That's,
Yeah.
that's another cool aspect of, you know, the way God made it.
Yeah, but not so fun.
Pastor, did you ever have to go down in what they call a Brady hole?
No. Brady hole, like a Brady cat hole?
We had
No.
friends from Oklahoma, but he was clear to joke. but
Oh, no, we didn't have
this
tornadoes.
Tornado.
Yeah.
Place that they call it Brady hole.
No,
Shelter type thing.
Yeah.
Retailers and.
I remember the first time there was a tornado siren going off in New Ulm, and I was freaking out because I'd never lived in tornado country. And there are people outside on the slip and slide. And I couldn't believe it, but then they said, "Oh, it's way on the other side of the county." And I was blown away, but,
So far away.
Not literally,
huh?
not literally.
Yeah, no. Fortunately, I was not literally blown away. Another time, my brother and I were working as lifeguards cleaning up the pool after a storm had caused us to kick everybody out. He stepped out of the baby pool, and about 5 seconds later, bam, it got struck by lightning.
Oh, my.
That was a very sobering moment. So, all right, well, we're almost done with this section, so I think we can get through it. 14 to 18.
Just before we go on, in context of this reading, how should we think about climate change that's going on?
I think it reminds us that, you know, we don't really fully understand everything. I don't know. I'm not sure. Huh?
God's in control, not man.
Yeah.
What can we do to stop it?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it should hedge us from being too overconfident. But could it be a punishment from God? I suppose it could, you know? I don't know. I don't. Maybe that's scary, but
Getting up the herd.
you know, yeah, people say stuff like that, but a lot of these, you know, keep in mind the projections 20 years ago said our whole seaboard was going to be covered in water. So I think some humility about the limits of our knowledge is in order. Oh yeah, the coming ice age and stuff. So, but could, you know, I don't know. It doesn't mean there's nothing to it by any means, but it just.
You can take from it that he's God and we're so not.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an interesting question though. Hadn't crossed my mind. Simon. Oh, sorry. His hand was up, but only for comfort.
I was just gonna say, I think it's presumptuous for us to think that we have control over, you know, these huge things that, you know, God tells us that, you know, this is what he does. And for us to think that, I mean, we want to take care of the earth, you know, because God gives it to us.
Yeah.
But to think that we can cause control these huge things, I think is, you know, a little arrogant. So.
Yeah,
Amen.
I tend to agree. I mean, I wonder how much things like the sun and, you know, you look at, and now I don't agree with all the ancient models of the age of the earth, but if you follow those, then the earth was equally warm a long time ago too. So I don't know.
This area was supposed to be covered by water.
Yeah, so, but I don't know enough about it to be too flippant. But the one thing though is that God did promise that as long as the earth endures, you know, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter will endure. So I guess maybe I take that to the bank a little too easily. I do like though, especially the environmental movement is so obsessed with global warming, but there's a lot of good things that we could focus on that everybody could agree on, like cleaning up trash. And I think people want to cut emissions anyway, just because we don't like smoke, you know, so I don't want to sound like I'm anti-conservation. I wish that we'd stuck with the word conservation too, but
Farmers.
now we're getting to a whole different topic. Jake, did you have any thoughts? You had asked the question, so you may have had something.
No, I agree with what Janelle said too, that so many people think we can control things, and I think the earth itself controls.
Yeah.
One question I've never been able to find is that they say if the earth is heating up, then more water will evaporate, and that would form more clouds, and that would block more sunshine. So to me, the earth is self-regulating, but
Yeah.
the cycle is so long that we don't see it in our lifetime. And so people get crazy. They run around like Chicken Little.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think when you don't trust God, though, it would be scary. I mean, imagine not really believing in God and thinking we're just here by accident. All of a sudden, how terrifying that right now, whatever the timeline, eventually humans are just going to cease to exist. And even if it takes 1 billion years, our planet's just going to wear out, and that's going to be it. And it's all going to be forgotten. I mean, I can understand the sort of terror in a certain way, and the sort of need to say like, well, we gotta control it. But then I do think it's arrogant to, well, and there may be over trusting scientists too. And, the collection of data and all those things is, yeah. And it's people who do it. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, you probably can apply it to global warming in that sense. It's a good point, Janelle. So why don't we try to finish real quick, and we'll still get it done within an hour. 14 to 18 is going to be a bunch of questions, and I'll answer my first question, that this sounds almost like what God is going to say in the next chapter. So like I said, dovetailing, getting closer and closer to even mimicking God's own speech as we approach the next chapter. Anybody here want to read those? Thank you, Lance.
Listen to this, Job. Stop and consider God's wonder. Do you know how God controls the clouds? It makes his lightning flash. Do you know how the clouds hang for a reason? These wonders of him who is perfect in knowledge. You who swelter in your clothes when the land lies hushed under the south wind. Can you join him in spreading out the skies, hard as a mirror of cast bronze?
Yeah. Simon.
One, him who's perfect in knowledge.
Yeah.
Be assured that my words are not false, I'm perfect in knowledge.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, that phrase, perfect knowledge.
That was not referring to language.
One who has perfect knowledge is with you. So you think that's saying that God is with you? That's a different way to look at it.
Anyway, he's never criticized because he's almost a very short range prophet.
So he's kind of claiming to be a prophet. That could be. In verse 3, he does say, I get my knowledge from afar. I will ascribe justice to my maker, but be assured that my words are not false. One who has perfect knowledge is with you.
It's never contradicted.
Yeah.
Where is that?
That's back at the beginning of chapter 36, verses 1 through 4. Yeah, that's very interesting, that the repeating of the phrase perfect knowledge there. So, yeah. That's a good observation. So he's asking all these questions. Now, the obvious answer is no. And we'll see that when God speaks too. Actually, the questions are not hard, because he never says, tell me how the horse gives birth. He just says, do you know how, all these things. Do you know how the mountain goat gives birth? Or do you know? And the answer is always no, I don't know. Yeah. Oh, I'm running low on battery. Okay. Yes. Well, I think maybe I should run and get it. How about read the next section, 19 through 24? I will go get I didn't ask the question. What's the point then of asking these things? But it's just to highlight how great God is. So we're seeing that, and he's just emphasizing the point.
Is that 37?
That is 37:16, where he says, those wonders of him who has perfect knowledge, referring to God. Oh, sure. It's in my office, where I sit. You know where that is? Okay. It's just the only laptop cord sitting there. Thank you. Thank you, Jenna. That's good. Now I can focus on one thing. 7 minutes remaining, but I'll just turn down my brightness in case. All right, who can read the last verses, 19 through 24? All right, thank you, Anna.
Now that's what we should say to him. We cannot draw up our case because of our darkness. Should he be told that I want to speak? Would any man ask to be swallowed up? Now no one can look at the sun, bright as it is in the skies, after the wind has swept. Out of the north he comes in golden splendor. God comes in
Thank you.
awesome majesty. The Almighty is beyond our reach and exalted in power. In his justice and great righteousness he does not oppress. Therefore, men revere him, for he does not have regard for all the wise in heart. Or does he not have regard for all the wise in heart?
What was the last reading?
Heart?
Yeah, for does he not have regard for all the wise in heart? What do you have? In their own conceit. Yeah.
All heart and mind are
Yeah,
close
I just,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, the heart is your own thinking. I don't remember the exact Hebrew here, so I'd have to check. But I do know that that last line could be translated as a question or as a statement rather than a question. So instead of saying, doesn't he have regard for all those wise in heart? He might be ending saying, he does not have regard for all those.
And that's what he said.
Yeah, that's what your translation is. So there's kind of, the problem is in in many ancient languages, they don't have a question mark. And so you have to figure out if it's a question or a statement a lot of the time. I think how that can give you, Yeah. yes. So then 3 questions here. So what important truth does Elihu maintain against Job in verse 23?
God is right. It's righteous. We don't know.
Yeah. So he is just, he is righteous. We don't have to question that. And he does specifically mention at the very end.
It's not gonna oppress you if you do something good.
Yeah. So God does not oppress people. And I think that's true even for Job. I mean, he has allowed him to suffer quite a bit, but he's not being cruel and oppressing him. That's not the right way to characterize God allowing him to be tested. And the same thing is true for us. I mean, people go through some hard tests. You could probably think of some people and it seems not fair and it seems like a lot to bear, but it's never right to say he's oppressing people. He's got more going on than that. And it's never out of just pure malice or anger that he allows struggle. So that's kind of an important point that he maintains. 14, how does Elihu end on a note of wisdom? All of 19 through 24, and I guess especially 24. Sure, Derek.
I think with 24, and you said about different translations in the footnote in the NIV, it says, or for he does not have regard for those who think they are wise.
Yeah.
It speaks to God being so much wiser than the wise.
Mm-hmm.
The foolishness of God is just man.
Yeah.
Just highlighting that understanding, kind of the whole point of this is that God knows so much more than we.
Yeah. And so he has kind of said that before, like even the wise people can't comprehend God's wisdom. It's too far beyond us. We can search for it, but we can't find it. And then it doesn't help that our translation doesn't, they translate a word differently. So where it says, therefore people revere him. I just did pull up the Hebrew. It says, therefore they fear him. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where Abraham saying, I said to myself, surely they don't fear God, that
Yeah.
there is surely no fear of God in this place. They will kill me because of my wife.
Yeah.
It's the fear of God. Vegetal praise, equivalent to true religion,
Yeah.
sense of reverence.
And do you remember what is the beginning of wisdom?
Fear of the
The
Lord.
fear of the Lord. Yeah. So he ends pointing them to wisdom, which is good. So he kind of agrees with Job on this, on what true wisdom is. And so that's good. That's better than saying he's got it all. Although earlier he did kind of say he had it all, but at least what he says fits better with what God's going to say. And then let's see, the last question I had was, where did I put that thing? The last line, oh, I already mentioned that. So I put that first. I don't know how I ended up with NB9 at the bottom. Do you have that? Oh, okay. Somehow I typed that while we were working together here. But that was it. And so next time we'll see the Lord speak. So Elihu is a little more, I think it's challenging just because there's good and bad and it's very subtle, the differences between him and the other friends. But we've seen he adds several things to the argument and he actually starts to speak more and more like the Lord as he's claiming to be inspired by the Lord. So whether he is or not, you know, I don't think every word he said was inspired, but maybe some of his ideas were.
But.
I mean, the book is inspired. Yeah, for sure.
There's a lot.
What's his name again?
Elihu, well, it means he is my God. So yeah, I mean, it could be that he is God speaking, but it just seems like, yeah, man, so some sort of prophet, kind of like Eliyahu is Elijah. So Elihu, Eliyahu, Elisha is Elisha. So yeah, I mean, he does kind of sound like a prophet. You're right.
There's an awful lot of references in the speech of the wisdom and power of the Lord.
Yeah, yeah.
When you're talking about Genesis, and
Mhm.
the power.
Yeah, and the friends emphasize that, but not as much, and they would always quickly go to, and so he must be punishing you. Yeah, they kept coming back to that, and he dances around it, but he never states it in such a strong way. So
But then next week we get the Lord.
yes, so that'll be good, and I think you'll find it very satisfying and helpful to read it, having gone through everything else. It packs even more of a punch than when you just kind of skip to the end. So glad you could all make it, and thanks for coming, and Lord's blessing on you.
Thank you. I really enjoy it.
Good. Always enjoy seeing you, and see you tomorrow, Jake.
Yes, right, 1 o'clock.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe you can just look at it and tell me what might be wrong. I'll get some gas. My mower, he's gonna look at my mower. So,
Didn't start first time of the year.
no, but it also didn't start halfway through or towards the end of the summer either. And I didn't take it in, and I was gonna take it in, and then I thought, well, wait a minute. Jake is good with these things, and man, and maybe he could look at it and let me know before I waste a bunch of money, and it's just something simple. Yeah. So thank you. Look forward to seeing you, and see you, Kelly, tonight.
6:30.
Bye.
Have a good night,
6:30
everyone.
tomorrow at the council. Yeah.